Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our afternoon plenary discussion and Heterodox Conversation. Has everyone been enjoying today at the Heterodox Academy Conference? All right. My name is Michael Regnier. I'm the Executive Director at HXA, and I have the pleasure of working with a terrific team of professional staff, some of whom work on this event all year round. So if I can ask, can we give them a round of applause? I'm very biased, but I think we have the best team. It's simply my role right now to introduce one of our former colleagues on Team HXA and someone who, before joining the staff, was an original member, I think, was a longtime member of our writers group, was briefly a campus community co-chair, and who even before that was a scholar, a sociologist by training. Martha McCoy is now the special assistant to the president of the University of Wyoming, where she's leading their work on intellectual freedom, and we're pleased to introduce her. Martha will then introduce what this event is and our esteemed discussants. Dr. Martha McCoy.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce the participants in our Heterodox Conversation on the role of legislation in reforming the academy, a topic HXA planned last December, but feels even more significant today. Before I introduce our two scholars, Mark Baurlein and Steven Brint, I want to tell you what a heterodox conversation is. A heterodox conversation brings together two scholars with different perspectives on a topic on which both have expertise. It's neither a one-sided lecture nor a debate with a winner and loser. It's a way to model the HXA way and deepen our understanding of a topic. You might notice that heterodox conversations don't tend to have as titles questions with a yes or no answer. We really want everyone in the audience to see themselves as part of the conversation. There's no predetermined right answer. President John Tomasi had the vision for HXA to offer this signature program, and I had the pleasure of executing that vision during my time with HXA. Now, there's many reasons to engage in dialogue and constructive disagreement: for political exchange, cultural exchange, or to resolve conflicts, for example. But as we know, intellectual exchange is the primary reason academics value constructive disagreement and dialogue. John always reminded me that these scholarly exchanges should ignite curiosity and be joyous. So no pressure, you guys, but it's going to be joyous. So our campus communities have been hosting heterodox conversations for the past year and a half or so. And I want to thank all of those campus community organizers, as well as the scholars who participated in the conversations we've had so far. You can see recordings of past heterodox conversations on the HXA's YouTube channel. You can just Google HXA Campus Community Events, and you'll see recordings of some fascinating conversations with a lot of constructive disagreement. And I want to thank the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations that have helped us bring, thanks to a generous donation, our most recent heterodox conversations to campuses that have collaborated with student chapters of Bridge USA. And they've also funded other really important dialogue events as well on these campuses. So thank you to them too. Now let me introduce our participants and go over our run of show. First up will be Mark Baurlein. Mark Baurlein earned his doctorate in English at UCLA in 1988. He taught at Emory from 1989 to 2018, with a 2.5-year break in 2003 to 05 to serve as the director of the Office of Research and Analysis at the National Endowment for the Arts. Apart from his scholarly work, he publishes in popular periodicals such as the Wall Street Journal, the Weekly Standard, the Washington Post, TLS, and Chronicle of Higher Education. His latest book, The Dumbest Generation: How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future, or Don't Trust Anyone Under 30 was published in May 2008. He recently co-edited a collection of essays entitled The State of the American Mind, 16 Leading Critics on the New Anti-Intellectualism, published in 2015. And Steven Brint is Distinguished Professor of Sociology and Public Policy at the University of California, Riverside, and the director of the Colleges and Universities 2000 Project. His studies of higher education have been funded for a quarter century by the National Science Foundation and 4 philanthropic foundations. He's the author of 4 and editor of 3 books and has published more than 100 journal articles and book chapters. He's also written for the American Prospect, the Chronicle of Higher Education Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the Washington Post, among others. His most recent book is 2 Cheers for Higher Education, and it won honorable mention for the American Sociological Association's Pierre Bourdieu Award, was co-recipient of the Emory Elliott Book Prize, and was named one of the top 10 books, lost my space. Well, it was named one of the top 10 books on higher education for 2019 by Forbes. He's an elected fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the Sociological Research Association. A native of Albuquerque, New Mexico, Steven Brint received his BA with highest honors from UC Berkeley and his PhD in sociology from Harvard University. So let me just mention, before they get started, we'll go in alphabetical order, and Mark Baurlein will start. And the way this works is Dr. Baurlein will give a 15-minute presentation, and then Dr. Brint will give the next presentation for 15 minutes. Then they'll talk with each other and ask each other clarification questions and challenge questions for 15 minutes. So we'll go 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, and then we'll have hopefully 20 to 25 minutes for Q&A with you all in our audience. And then I think Michael Regnier will come back to the stage and wrap things up for us after that. So please help me welcome Mark Baurlein.
Thank you. It's great to be here with Heterodoxy 10th anniversary. The one moment last night was worth all the labor of travel, and that was when we had the guilty pleasure of being able to say collectively, "We told you so." So it's been a long time coming for a lot. Some of us have been at this for 25 years in the battle against politicization, identity politics, political correctness, and the intellectual deterioration that has gone along with that. I think I'm the only state representative on the program. I mean, I was an academic for 30 years at Emory University and did a lot of scholarly books and articles and that, but I did have some government experience as a low-level appointee in the George W. Bush administration at one of the cultural agencies, worked on Common Core for the governors, that type of thing, did standards and curriculum for a lot of different states, and now as a trustee of this new College of Florida, which is defined as a state officer. Trustees are actually working for the state. They are not officially part of the campus itself. Our job, our duty, is to the citizens of Florida, not to the campus. And the job is to make sure that intellectual and academic and financial malfeasance don't happen, that the university lives up to its statutory mission. I think in terms of state representatives, I heard a lot of comments about the Trump administration, much of it laced with disdain and indignation. And I think in the spirit of heterodoxy, next year you should have someone to make the Trump case. It'd be a good million moment. There are some smart people who can do that, and that would be a good debate to have. All right. That said, what I'll do is I'll talk about the work in Florida, what we did at New College when we came in as trustees, and then did some advising on state legislation as well. Our topic is legislation. Some legislation I'll mention, discuss on what can't be done in the classroom, and then what has to be done. in the classroom as well. Wrap up with just a little statement about the humanities, and then turn it over to Steven. So, just tell you the story. In December 2022, someone in the DeSantis office called me to ask if I would be trustee at this little college in Sarasota, which I actually hadn't heard of before. And I immediately said yes. I'd done some work for Florida in previous years on ELA standards, wrote a lot of the literature standards for DeSantis' team, and I liked what he let us do, and so I immediately said yes. A month later, at the end of January, by the time of our first board meeting, the word had gone out. A narrative had been given, a national narrative. The New York Times, Washington Post, Chronicle had already done stories on what was going on before we even convened, and the storyline really was conservative vandals descend upon Sarasota to despoil this liberal arts gem. That was the line, and when we showed up, there were 300, 500 protesters outside. A lot of them poured into the auditorium. The meetings are open. A lot of the press was there as well, did a lot of interviews. The scholarly associations all had written letters denouncing us as ideologues come to tear down academic freedom. And the AAUP weighed in as well. I'll get to that if I have time. But in the first board meeting, we began our work. We met with DeSantis that afternoon before it in the airport. And he said, just do it. And so we fired the president. We got rid of the general counsel. The provost was gone a few days later, and we immediately terminated with extreme prejudice all DEI programs, policies, personnel. The personnel were shifted at first, but that was done. There was a lot of screaming and shouting in the public comment. People, lined up at every meeting. These are public meetings to denounce us. Some of them would have to be carried away by police officers. And we'd have to be hustled out the back. I never felt endangered. I don't want to over-dramatize it at all. It was really more of a circus atmosphere. In subsequent meetings, 5 people came up for early tenure. They had 100% faculty support. The dean said yes. The provost said yes. And we said no, 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 no. I read through the files. I read through the scholarship. These weren't even close to being early tenure cases. In a subsequent meeting, we terminated the gender studies concentration. No more gender studies major. We were grandfathering out the juniors and seniors in that. But from then on, done. And in the discussion, I could talk about the academic rationale for all of these actions. We proceeded to change the general education requirements, the curriculum, and there were the nuts and bolts business of contracts and building plans, strategic plans, the athletic additions that took place. But that really, I guess, covers most of the politically controversial side of things there in New College. We could then get to the legislation that was done that has gotten a lot of press as well. And I did some advising to the Board of Governors about this. One piece of legislation was about what you cannot do in any K-12 or college public classroom in the state of Florida. And I will just read to you a few of the stipulations of what you cannot do. 1, members of one race, color, national origin, or sex are morally superior to members of another. You can't claim this as a general condition. A person by virtue of his race, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. Talk about unconscious racism of these people in classrooms. That's it. Another one, a person by virtue of his race bears responsibility for or should be discriminated against on the basis of what people in the same race did in the past. And finally, you can't discriminate people by virtue of their race, sex, and so on in order to promote diversity, equity, or inclusion. So DEI generally was out. We did it first at New College. I think we were the first ones to ban DEI in higher education and in January 2024. Other legislatures have followed through on this as well. But that was what is proscribed in the classroom. That kind of identity politics was ruled out by law. Another regulation was passed regarding general education in Florida, and this is not negative, it is positive. Whenever applicable, and actually that means in the non-quantitative science requirements, whenever applicable, provide instruction on the historical background and philosophical foundation of Western civilization and this country's historical documents. There you have the domain for the softer classes in general education. We want the foundations, historical, philosophical, of Western civilization, and we'll just say the American founding as well. This is mandated. As a second stipulation, it says any courses that faculty submit from different departments for approval for general education have to be approved by the president and the trustees. So the final decision on what counts as a general education course lies with the trustees, not with the faculty themselves. Well, I mean, the response is, who the hell do these people think they are? How arrogant can they possibly be? And I'll just say that none of this would have happened if not for the phenomenon that John and Jonathan and others have raised, and that is, if the university, the college hadn't sunk so low in public esteem, if the approval rating went down in the low 30s, now this would not have been politically possible. No politician, even in Florida, would have taken on this. This was an expression of the popular will taking place. So the alienation, the estrangement of town and gown is really what licensed this process to take place. And I'll just add at New College. New College was a complete mess. I'll give you details if you want. When we arrived there, I'll just say this college was designed for 1,500 to 1,800 students. It had 680 students at the time. It was not serving the state of Florida. We might not have had warrant for doing what we did. Finally, about the humanities, in particular, in my neck of the woods there. Many people have said today and yesterday that the pursuit of truth is really the core mission of the college university. That's actually not quite the case with the humanities. Yes, you have inquiries pursuing the truth of what is the accurate text of an Old English manuscript? What are the historical conditions of the creation of leaves of grass? Those are inquiries, but in terms of the most common practice in the humanities, it is not the pursuit of truth. It is the maintenance, the preservation of tradition, with the ultimate goal of inculcating humanitas in these rising souls. Humanitas going, back in the Romans, Cicero. What is humanitas? Humanitas is that collection of virtues that distinguish us from the animals, that make us more than creatures of appetite. And the best way to inculcate humanitas is to impart the tradition. The best, smartest, most ingenious, creative creations of human beings that amount to civilization. That is the content, that is the purpose of the humanities as a sort of large endeavor. And what is the tradition? The tradition is Western civilization in, again, its best expressions. Great books, capital G, capital B, high art, capital H, capital A, the American heritage. This is the core knowledge that we want general education in the humanities to develop. And more advanced courses, yes, you can go into critique, more detailed examination, whatever. But for general education in the humanities, this is what it is about, the preservation of the tradition, not the search for truth. Now, what has happening to the traditions. Over 30, 40 years, it has been diversified, challenged, problematized, subverted, transgressed, dismantled, deconstructed by the professors. This is the dogma. All the things that I listed, Western Civ, great books, and so on, have come under withering critique from the professor. And this has been a disaster for the humanities. An intellectual disaster. Standards have been completely lowered. That's what politicization always does. And the material condition of the humanities has plummeted. I do not know one material measure of the humanities that one can come up with that hasn't sunk precipitously. The gloom is everywhere. Okay? And again, I'll move on. Turn the helm over to Steven. Leave that for the discussion if you want to hear more about how the humanities have become so diminished. They were the core of liberal education. Now they are the margins. That's what the numbers are. So I would say to the humanities professors who don't like what we've done with the humanities, you blew it, you ruined it, you destroyed them. Of course, you need agents to come in and try to save them, to rescue them. So we come back to, we told you so. Steven, all yours.
So that gives you a sense. So this is a partial roll call of the Trump administration actions in relation to higher education. $12 billion of grants canceled, frozen. The indirect cost recovery cut by 4 times from its highest rate. Dozens of investigations launched against universities, vows to end the Department of Education, firing of half of the staff. And you'll note here that some of these actions are legal. For example, although it's being challenged in the courts, if the administration says that priorities of the agencies have changed, they can cancel a grant legally. But we need to make a distinction between things that are legal or may be legal and things that are wise. And to see this, we might go back to a paper published 70 years ago by the MIT economist Robert Solow. And Robert Solow found that there was a very large gap in economic growth between countries after the main factors of production were taken into account: land, labor, and capital. And he attributed that gap to what he called technical advance. Technical advance has 2 components. One component is technological innovation. That's the more important one. The other is human capital development through increased schooling. That's also important. So it is not the case that universities do all the technological innovation or even all the human capital development for that matter. But what they do is a very large proportion of the basic science research. So this is the kind of work on the behavior of bacteria and macromolecules in cells that has led to the mRNA vaccines, or the basic architecture of packet switching that led to the internet, and many of the breakthroughs that we've seen, AI, CRISPR gene editing, 3D printing, quantum computing, have originated in basic research in universities. So we have to also realize that the Trump administration, yes, it's focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and some other things like that, but They've also cut grants on climate change, vaccines, cancer, misinformation, disinformation. These are topics that even a lot of Republicans think are important. So it is not the case that corporations or donors are going to step in to fill the gap. Corporations are about 6% of university funding now. Donors about 9% for science and scholarship. The rest is state and local, a small amount, or university self-funding, which is an increasing amount, as you can see here. Alternatively, it's not the case that corporations are going to pick up the slack for the cuts in university research. They have short time horizons unless something can come to market pretty quickly. In most areas, it's not going to go forward. It's going to be scrapped. So that leads to a less than optimal investment in basic research. So grant funding, one big issue. The other big issue that I want to focus on is the climate for free inquiry. So this is a selection. It's hard to see, I know. It's a selection of the words, 350 words that PEN America has come up with that the Trump administration is scouring websites and grants to see if these words are on it, so maybe the grant should be cut. It includes words like accessible, belonging, community, also includes men, women, people. So what we have to see, I think, is that scientific and scholarly productivity is very much related to a climate of free inquiry. This is a list of the top producing countries for science as measured by the Nature Index. And you can see all of them, with the exception of China, are places that have robust free inquiry. China, we need an asterisk because a lot of the people that relocate to China were actually taught in countries that have free inquiry climates and cultures. The canonical case is of Germany after 1932. Before 1932, Germany was way ahead of the rest of the world in terms of Nobel Prizes. After 32, the US, which was already on the upswing, vaulted ahead. Now the US produces 70% of Nobel laureates. A lot of that, of course, had to do with government support for science, but some of it had to do with the emigres themselves, and especially the students that they taught. It is the case that academics sometimes err in the topics that they study, and the disciplines sometimes err. My own discipline has certainly erred at times. And I came to HXA because I was concerned about the climate on campus, the climate of conformity, the repression of free inquiry. But I now think that there's a new, bigger problem that we need to face. And I'm going to just give you a couple of anecdotes from my research. One is in Florida, actually. I was listening to committee hearings for, I think it was Senate Bill 266, and Aaron Grahl, state senator, was quizzed by a Democratic colleague, and he asked her, well, should Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings be in the general education curriculum in Florida? And she drew a blank, and she finally said, well, that'll be up to the Board of Governors to say. Well, the Board of Governors had one professor on it at that time, and the rest were business people, excellent people in their fields, but not fit to judge texts or disciplines. Not long ago, I was at a meeting, and the fellow from the Heritage Foundation opined that sociology was no longer a valid discipline, and it did not need to be in college catalogs. And I asked him, have you ever taken a sociology course? And the answer was no. And I said, well, what ideas in sociology do you think it's important for students not to know? Perhaps the role of reference groups in forming self-concepts, or maybe the power of ritual in binding communities and empowering communities and groups, or maybe the role of social capital, as Robert Putnam showed in building community well-being. Which of those do you think are unimportant? And again, there was no answer. But the problem goes deeper than politicians simply not knowing what is worthwhile to study and what texts are worthwhile. When you have people with strong ideological predispositions joined to unchecked or relatively unchecked power, you have some extreme outcomes that occur. You have, for example, death warrants against writers who are considered to be blasphemous. Or you have Lysenkoism, where Lysenko said genes are a bourgeois invention and set Soviet agriculture back by 20 years or more. And all the way up to the Cultural Revolution in China, which destroyed intellectual life for many decades under Mao. Of course, we don't have fatwas in the United States, but we do have hints of Lysenkoism in claims by Christopher Rufo and others that DEI is a Marxist invention. And we have more than hints of cultural revolution in the Trump administration's efforts to shutter and redefine what is science. So we have a lot of work to do. As Mark said, public confidence in higher education has plummeted down 20% in just a decade. The main issues in the public's mind are cost, not humanitas or anything like that. Cost, but also perceptions of political bias. And I've been working on these issues. I know many of you have been working on these issues. They're very important for us to reform our universities so they're more like what we want in terms of Enlightenment liberalism or pluralism. But we shouldn't forget, while we're making those reforms, that it has never been the case since World War II that fewer than half of the best universities in the world have been US universities. And here's a list from 2023, the Shanghai rankings, 12 of the top 15 from the United States. And we can see what might happen under the Trump administration, also in some of the states. We can see endowment taxes going up quite a bit. Now there are two different proposals in Congress, but more grants closed, more scholars pursuing work outside of the United States, others being quiet for fear of sanctions, students maybe even being deported for expressing their First Amendment rights, international students avoiding the United States rather than flocking to it, as has been the case for decades and decades. The US has had twice the number of international students as any other country. And all of this will lead to large reductions in scientific and scholarly production if it happens. We don't know that all of these things are going to happen. There are different indicators, different days. The loss of brain power is already happening. Canada has attracted some important American scholars. The European Union has an investment fund. The Australian government has an investment fund to attract American scholars. You can see what the French President Emmanuel Macron said. We also shouldn't forget the great mission of universities, the great mission to discover new knowledge, to disseminate that knowledge, and to be a depository of organized knowledge so that others can have access to it. And it's a sad fact that the University of California, this is a mission statement of my university, University of California, from 5 decades ago. It's a sad fact that over the last couple of decades, that mission was compromised on too many occasions for what amounted to ham-handed social engineering. But it's much more than a sad fact. It's an unfolding tragedy and a self-inflicted wound that the Trump administration and some of the conservative states are trying to diminish the capacity of the most effective institutional agents of that mission under ideological pretenses. The state has a role, but that's not it. Thank you. Okay, okay. Mark?
Let me ask, I mean, from my perspective, the great triumph of the university in America has been the sciences, especially the biomedical. I mean, they're the hospital runs, and technology, engineering, and so on. And the great failure is that softer side, the humanities. And about the Trump administration's actions and science. I mean, I've got a nephew who's a researcher at Harvard. He's a Mass General on the faculty there, so I get a lot of insight. He's worried about his work being defunded, being cut off. Is it that, I mean, I'm not close to people in the administration on this. Are they saying to Harvard and the others, just drop the social engineering and all the money will come right back?
We don't know. The answer is we don't know. And the worry is, I mean, look, some of the, some issues in diversity, equity, inclusion writ large are 100% valid. We do want to know, why is it that Black women die in childbirth at a higher rate than women from other groups? Why would we not want to know that? That's a diversity, social equity kind of issue, and I think there are a lot of those. So even there, I don't, you know, I would disagree to some degree. But to get to the question, we don't know what the Trump administration is going to do, but we have some indicators that when the state gets involved and the state finds that it's able to do things, and this has happened in a lot of conservative states, that the first step doesn't look so bad, and then there's subsequent steps that look worse. So just recently in Texas, they have a new law that was just signed by the governor that limits, after making a huge deal about intellectual diversity and freedom of expression, and they passed a law in Texas a few years ago about this. Great, wonderful. But now they're limiting freedom of expression. And the same person who carried the first bill is carrying the second bill. So I think that once you have some success, there's a tendency, and we've seen this in some of the states, to take the next step and the next step. And we don't know. I think already there's a lot of worry in the states about, what can I say in class? Can I talk about systemic racism? Is that something that I might get in trouble for because of these laws? Well, there is such a thing as systemic racism. You can talk about, you should be able to talk about that. And I mean, you should also have, of course, people countering it and saying, well, you know, you're blowing it up or whatever. It's not as true as it was in the past. But you know, the Trump administration is very hard to read because they do have this, you know, this sort of this taco thing where they put forward something maximalist and then they pull back, and that could happen. And it could be that this is more a goad than anything else in the end. But that hasn't been, you know, and we don't know, is this really an authoritarian government or not? And insofar as it is, we do have a record of authoritarian governments. And we do have a record of what they have done in universities. So we're in this ambiguous space now where we just aren't certain how this is going to go.
I think that there's a check on the authority of the politicians here, and that is once again the popular will. If it becomes clear that the overstepping is taking place, they're going to lose support. It's going to be a less popular endeavor. And I think that it would be then up to the faculty, the university community to make the case for what is happening. And it's something that they're not very good at. They're not very good at talking to off-campus populations. It's one of the reasons why, again, all of this is happening. And I just have to say, I think 95% of the case of allegations of systemic racism are nonsense. Or let's just say they are non-falsifiable.
Now I'm going to ask you a question, Mark. You use the term humanitas, which is a noble term. But I think there's an issue in my mind of well, what's included in that, and what are the great texts, and what are the things that students need to be reading. And just to give one example, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I remember loving reading him, and I wonder whether before the 1980s he would have been in the canon. How do we judge what should be in this frame of humanitas, and why is? I mean, I'm also a defender, I suppose, of Western civilization. Definitely, I look to the Enlightenment. But there's a big world out there, and a lot of the prizes and the Nobel Prizes in literature have gone to people outside of the United States. I mean, I think the last person who got it in the United States was actually Bob Dylan, right? So what goes into it, and how do you select?
It's easy. One, there's the test of time. Two, you look, first of all, at foundations. You say, look, contemporary work, and I think work last 30 or 40 years, has to give way to the works of the ages. Milton's Paradise Lost is a monument, and it's going to be around forever. The work of Walt Whitman is fundamental to what used to be called the national character. And you look at all the people who said this about Whitman, from the British aesthetes to a couple of the modernists, William Carlos Williams, to the beat poets as well, and to Bob Dylan too. There you have a determination, and you have to select. You have to pick. E.D. Hirsch, liberal Democrat all the way, although an education conservative, said it is crucial that you have a core canon that everyone reads, everyone is exposed to. You must have a common intellectual, artistic, cultural background to give cohesion to a society. I think multiculturalism in these schools has been tried and proven an utter failure. It has not improved the learning of students. The loss of the core has, I mean, universities recognized this when they did the one book read, freshman read, over the summer. They said, it is important everyone read the same book because you can't say anymore any book that every student, freshman, has read sometime during the high school years. And so I think it's an old-fashioned notion. We know what goes in there. Shakespeare goes in there. Mozart, Wagner, they go in there. Bernini and Rembrandt go in there. And again, you can only put in so much. You have to make choices. And I think that the syllabus is pretty easy to construct. And I'm talking more about general education here. Of course, Marquez is a great writer. There are lots of contemporary great writers. Those should be moved later on in the curriculum. My turn? Let's see. Oh gosh, you said something. Steven, what is the value of undergraduate foreign students? I know the main value of undergraduate foreign students, they write a full check, there are no financial aid issues, there are no loan issues, they get all their money up front. And at Emory, boy, a lot of those foreign students, they were driving Maseratis around campus. Man. So is there another value to having the foreign students besides undergrad, besides money?
Well, I mean, so let's say you're in a campus that has a lot of interaction among students. These students can, I don't know that they always do, they can provide some information about the rest of the world that would be useful to American students, some of whom are quite provincial, to learn about, to see how other people live and think and value. I do agree that the economic motive is a pretty strong motive on the part of university campuses. My interest, but universities also have to meet a payroll. So to me, that has to be taken into account. My biggest concern is about the graduate students. And what I would love to see is American graduate students, native-born American graduate students, being as well prepared in science and in math and engineering so that they could take more of those places. I would be supportive of that. But right now, that does not exist. And a lot of the people who come over to study in graduate school stay. So you have, I think it's 35% of American Nobel laureates in science are people who were born or educated abroad. And I did a study of this. It's about a third of the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine that were born abroad. So the United States, gets a huge amount out of its recruitment of international students at the graduate level. And the fact that we're on the brink, or maybe already past the brink of giving that up, is just a huge tragedy for the country.
I know we have just a couple minutes more. One thing that you mentioned, the 21% in one plan proposed endowment tax. A couple of us actually tried to lobby a member of Congress to tax the big endowments above a certain amount, and actually all that tax money would go toward two-year colleges. And that would make it a very progressive tax. Would you like that?
I need to look at it a little bit more. I'm a researcher, and see what would happen to university operations. But definitely the community colleges, this is where we have the biggest problems right now. Most people in this audience are probably from liberal arts colleges or universities, but community colleges have lost a quarter of their enrollment over the last decade. And because of the amount of inequality in this country, even $500 a semester is way too much for many folks. So we either need new institutions that are going to provide the possibility of upward mobility for these folks and also job relevant training, or we need to rebuild our community colleges. So any proposal that has that as an aim, I would take very seriously. Okay, let's see if I have one last question. I guess the thing that I worry about, even in the States, in Florida, for example, is the people who feel like the state is telling them that what they can and cannot teach or investigate. And like I said, the academy needs reform. There are some weaknesses in the disciplines and so forth, and all the people in this audience can help and are helping. But that's, for me, the state getting into that business is just really dangerous. And I don't think that you have that view. So I'd like to hear you talk about it more.
Well, my experience would be, yeah, you've got to turn this over to people with academic experience who will be advising. The politicians at New College, I mean, I was there. A professor from Hillsdale was there. A professor from Claremont Graduate School. So you had experienced academics, full professors. We've done tenure reviews and everything else, who could lead the way on a lot of the academic decision making. That's what you need to have. You don't want off campus. I mean, the campus is such an unusual place. You want the people with the kind of experience and the input to be involved in all of that. I mean, that's really all I can answer. And politicians, they love the power, right? Especially if it can, any revenue that they can get out of it, and popular support. But I think, again, the popular support will erode, and they are so exquisitely sensitive to any change in their popular. They do focus groups, polling all the time. They spend a lot of their staff doing precisely that. And so I think that, an article in the local paper, they pay close attention to. Georgia was going to pass some horrible standards in ELA. And someone told me about them, and I wrote a piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution trashing Kemp and Governor Kemp and the superintendent. They published it because it was a conservative attacking a Republican, so that the AJC would take that. I got a call right afterwards from someone in Kemp's office, and I said, you cannot do this. You can't pass these stupid standards doing the same old thing over and over again while reading scores just go down and down. You've got to do something different. So I was just a pain, and they actually brought me in to write a lot of the Georgia standards, including memorization, recitation of classic poems and speeches in every grade level. That was the best one that I got into the standards. So I think that the politicians are more malleable than we might think, than we might expect. They do pay attention to what goes on, and then the press and constituencies.
Thanks very much for the conversation so far. We want to open it up to your questions. There'll be two people coming around with microphones. So when a microphone gets to you, it'll be your turn. I can't really see you all out there, so but the people are going around. Please state your name real briefly, and then try to make your question as brief as possible. And if you're addressing it to Mark or Steven, please say so, or if you'd like either one to answer, that's fine too.
Hey there, I'm Kenny Hsu. I'm the Executive Director of David Stoning's for Freedom of Thought and Discourse. Mark and Steven, thanks for the conversation. My question is to Mark. So I know that you have had a lot of influence at the New College of Florida. There was also another college at the University of Florida that had another leadership transition recently and appointed a new, is in the process of appointing a new president. But there was some newsworthiness from that too, because there were some rejections. And I was wondering if you could explain why you rejected one of the presidential candidates, Santa Ono, who, before he wanted to come to the University of Florida, served as president of Michigan, and he was very much for DEI 2.0, rejecting a lot of the idiotic biases that DEI induces in people while still affirming those principles. So could you walk us through some of the decision-making of the leadership at the highest level?
Well, on that, I think I weighed on that just by retweeting something by Chris Rufo. Rufo went on the warpath on that one. I actually thought he was going to lose that battle. He did with the regents, or the trustees at UF. It was the Board of Governors who rejected Ono. And he just brought up some materials that I thought were disturbing. And I thought that why in the world is Florida bringing someone in who is okay with a lot of the DEI stuff? I mean, Stephen and I disagree on that. I think it's a pernicious thing. I think DEI is actually contrary to academic freedom. I think every department that ran job applications that required a diversity statement was applying an ideological litmus test. And I think that it was so vast. It was the story about the University of Michigan, right, to the New York Times story a few months back, that had a lot of traction. $250 million spent on DEI, a vast DEI bureaucracy. It's the DEI industrial complex there. And what gain came out of it? There's research that says DEI diversity workshops are actually destructive to the aims, the stated aims of those programs. So no compromise on this. Somewhere else, not here.
Hi, Bill Warner, UC Santa Barbara. I also have a question for Mark. How can you evade the following questions or charges? You've shown how to work with the governor to take over a state college. You've given the governor and his appointees the ultimate control of the curriculum, which is a component of academic freedom. And even if you've done these things well, how can you determine who will have these roles in the future and undergo the same kind of reform which you would find drastic and unnecessary today? I guess the broadest way to put it is this is a no vote, following Chris Rufo's many, lots of writing that built up to the takeover. The voice that's censored here is the academic freedom of the faculty members of the future. Well,
Let's say something about the trustees. We didn't assume any power. Trustees have the power. It's already there. Regents and trustees just haven't exercised their power for a long time. Most places want trustees just to do rubber stamping and write a check to come in on things. But look, trustees, we're insured. Okay, we each have $250,000 insurance policies against what we do if we engage in any misconduct. That tells you the duties. We're like the trustees of a trust there. We're responsible for what goes on the campus. So the power was always there. Now, an example, I mentioned the 5 early tenure cases that we turned down despite universal support among the faculty. This was a breakdown of peer review. I went back. The faculty hadn't turned down a tenure case in 10 years, and yet new college would insist upon, we are a vigorous research undergraduate college. They boasted of that. And early tenure, in my experience, is granted in rare cases. What someone has an offer with tenure from a school of equal or higher ranking. Someone has done so much work that it's a no-brainer. We want to keep this person. That's a rare case of early tenure. There have been several early tenures before which said, this faculty is not operating in peer review, it's acting like a club, okay? And they were trying to get these people through before we got our feet settled on the ground. So actually it was our responsibility to say no. And again, I went through all these records, they weren't even close. So it was the faculty letting down on that one, so we had to take that action. Now, who's gonna replace us? I don't know. But again, if this were politically unpopular, we would feel the pressure from the state. We are state officers there. It would hurt DeSantis. I said to DeSantis in our meeting, what if we do things like DEI stuff and the Biden administration comes after the school from the EEOC coming after us? And DeSantis said, every time the Biden administration does something against me, my numbers go up. And that's not a trivial response. It's not a joke. That's the political equation here. Public universities are going to react to public pressure. Now, what we want to do is get academic excellence, academic freedom, strong peer review, excellent education, part of the equation of political popularity. We're Californians, and California had the greatest system in the world, and it was three-tier: the UCs, the Cal States, and the two-year colleges. And the two-year colleges were excellent. They were great preparation in the 70s, through the 90s, I would say, in getting students those 2 years of extra acclimation to higher education, who would then transfer. I had a lot of friends at UCLA who transferred in from the two-year colleges. Do you know the book Academically Adrift? It was the big academic book of the year. It came out a dozen years ago. Two researchers looked at collegiate learning assessment scores, which is taken as freshmen and then seniors, and it is a test of problem-solving critical thinking. It was a shock to the entire higher education world because at many, many campuses, there was negative learning. The seniors scored lower than when the same seniors were freshmen. Their capacities went down. And then the general overall scores were poor as well. It was the topic. And I actually think standards have gone down. Requirements are lower than they used to be. And this is, I mean, there are a lot of the pressure, grade inflation right there. The most popular grade in higher education in 1960, you know what I'm going to say, was a C. Okay? A's were about 10 to 15% of all grades. Now, A's are about 45%, A or A minus of all grades. That's absurd. It's a meaningless scale there. But that right there signifies the deterioration. Pre-med, the hard science, physics, chemistry, no. Those are still, they've got their empirical demand right there. All the others, down.
So, over here. Oh, to the left. I should stand. Hi, Matt Burgess, University of Wyoming. I have a question for both of you. So, Steven, you summarized some of the evidence that universities provide huge public good values. You know, I've seen estimates of something like 20% of productivity growth since World War II. We can argue about the intangible humanitas, but disproportionately, the economic benefits are coming from the capital-intensive hard sciences. On the other hand, folks in this room have been working for the last 10 years to raise awareness about the fact that universities have been pervasively, flagrantly violating civil rights laws and other laws like First Amendment, contract laws, that existed before the Trump administration. So and that some of these problems exist disproportionately in the social sciences and humanities. So my question for Steven is, if not the government, what's your theory of change for how universities are going to fix themselves? And then, Mark, sorry. My question for you is, why is the Trump administration whacking the hard sciences in a handful of universities and not doing anything about, for example, all the universities whose civil rights law violations have been published by people like Aaron Sibarium and John Seiler? It seems like we're disproportionately, the analogy I think is like a cancer patient, right? You got one side saying, I don't actually have cancer, and then you have the doctor saying, here's a treatment that kills your healthy cells. I don't understand any of it.
Okay, so I'll go first. So the government has a role as a goad, and the public has a role that way too. There was already, before the second Trump administration, there was a lot of progress that was being made. It's slow, but thanks to HXA, and thanks to FIRE, and thanks to alumni groups, and thanks to a lot of individual faculty members on campuses, the tide was beginning to turn. Now, it would have taken longer for that tide to turn. And I think the public has a role to say, we don't like what's going on in universities, and the political representatives through, as mediating the public, have a role to say, there's some things we don't like about this, and we want you to, figure out how to change but the problem is that that's not where the politicians stop. And they have done things that could be crushing to science and scholarship and to free inquiry. And so what we need to do is to create that middle on campus, that middle that believes in academic values. I think Mark and I actually share a fair amount in terms of our thinking about academic standards. And college presidents have a big role to play here too. I mean, they have the capacity to reward people who are paragons of free inquiry. They have capacities to give funds to departments that deserve them and not give funds to departments that don't deserve them. They cannot give tenure to people. They've been in a kind of fearful crouch, I think, from the loud voices on campus. Maybe that's changing. So there could be, I think that there could be some unintended positive consequences of all this agitation that's being directed at universities by the Trump administration and some of the states by hastening that. But the unintended or the intended consequences are bad.
Maybe this is naive, but I think that in the Trump administration, I can't believe that they want to pull permanently scientific, I can't believe that they want to pull out of a lot of these studies and labs, that they don't have a plan to sustain them.
Well, I think that if it does not fit the ideological predispositions of the administration, yes, that's what they want.
Well, no, I think cancer research, things like that, we'll see how it shakes out on that. I mean, it could be that it is simply it's a standoff of saying as soon as the things Aaron Sibarium and others have brought out about Harvard's practices, it's nauseating what Harvard has been doing in a lot of these areas. And that, of course, makes Harvard a more popular target of the Trump people in the Department of Ed. And I think I think the pushing is going to happen. I think that a year from now, a lot of those practices will be gone and a lot of the scientific funding will be back. That's what I think is going to happen. Now, why go after Harvard? You always go after the biggest, toughest guy in the gang. If you beat him, all the others will follow suit.
It's probably time for one more question.
Sure. I have to be super quick. I'm John McMillan from Georgia State University. Mark, you said that the Trump administration's attacks on higher education would not be possible if not for the fact that universities had plummeted in public esteem. And you said that your own machinations, if I can use that word, are sort of sensitive to public opinion. And I want to just follow up on what someone else said. Public opinion won't matter very much if an authoritarian government makes incursions into civil society, and that's where I think that's what I think you're missing.
Well, if you ask social and religious conservatives, they would tell you that authoritarian government has been intervening in their own small societies for a long time.
Hi, I'm Florence Dorr from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, I'm an English professor. And so I guess I have a couple of questions. The first one is it all or nothing, the question of whether government intervention is appropriate in higher education? So for example, if English departments are, have stopped functioning because we're mired in questions of identity politics, and we can't teach people how to read Milton anymore, or Shakespeare, or Garcia Marquez for that matter. Students can barely read, 2 chapters of that at this point, right? So if we're having problems with that, then we're failing at our mission. And if the faculty can't function well enough to fix that, I mean, it's sort of a version of your question, who's going to do it? So maybe in that case, it is appropriate for boards of trustees or state governments, right, to come in and do this. But that I'm wondering if there's some if either one of you sees a distinction between that lack of functionality and the state intervention at that level with a faculty who have some academic expertise versus gutting all of science research. I mean, those seem like 2 possibly really different things. So I understand it's a principle of governmental intervention, but maybe it's not all or nothing. Maybe there are certain instances where it's like, okay, this is really screwed up. You guys have ruined it. We're going to need some help here on the one hand. And on the other hand, okay, we can't ruin science, ruin cancer research forever. Aren't there gradations here?
Yes. I think that there's just I guess something that I really don't like is these statements like all English departments are ruined, all history departments are ruined, all sociology departments are ruined, all DEI is terrible. Like, no, we're researchers. We ought to know, we ought to find out the extent to which that's true. Let's say it's true in English, okay? Let's say it's true. I don't know that it's true. I mean, my wife is a historian. She is the most traditional kind of historian you can possibly imagine. She studies the transition from paganism to Christianity in the Roman Empire. She does, and a lot of her colleagues are doing great scholarship along very traditional lines. Like, why are we painting these disciplines with such a, sweeping brush? But let's say it's true. Let's say it's true. I think I worry about politicians who have ideological predispositions and unchecked power what they're going to do. I said that, and I do worry about that. So it's really has to be up to people in, mostly, they can be a goad, mostly it has to be up to people like the people in this room and college presidents to carry the day and to insist on good standards where they don't exist and to stop giving money to departments where those standards don't exist, where that scholarship is bad. So that's my answer. I'm just very much more worried, I think, than Mark about what happens when the state starts telling you what you can teach and what texts are valuable and what texts aren't valuable. We're the experts.
Just a quick thing on the material ruination of the humanities. If you add up all the majors in English, history, all the foreign languages, philosophy, and linguistics, it's less than 4% of the total there. That's what I meant when I said humanities, they're just a marginal condition. Most students now, because general education has given up on any kind of core that would have some kind of humanistic ground, most students, freshman comp might be just about the only real humanities course you take, and most freshman comp courses are not literary, they're social. They're about social issues, you read op-eds and things like this. So a humanistic experience for most students who go to college now barely exists. That's what I meant by the ruin of the humanities. And this is a terrible loss for 18-year-olds maturing, coming through, and not to be exposed to the masterpieces, to the great works, the genius, the great ideas of the past.
All right, thank you. That's all the time we have. Really appreciate our panelists and our participants.
Thank you.